Hi everyone, it's Katrina.
Number 10. The Cannibal King. Unas was the last king of the 5th dynasty of Egypt, the very last ruler of what historians generally agree to be the golden age of the Old Kingdom. Egypt would continue into the 6th dynasty, but that would be the end of their reign as the superpower of North Africa. After the 6th dynasty came to an end, Egypt slipped into their very own dark age. But let's talk about Unas, a fairly mysterious king who we don't know all that much about. He was buried at the southwest corner of the Step Pyramid of Djoser, located in the massive archaeological site of Saqqara. It's believed that he ruled Egypt between 2375 and 2345 BC. He had 2 queens named Canute and Nebit. Oh, and he may have practiced cannibalism. That last part is a little unexpected, isn't it? And while we have no hard proof of this, we do have the text which was found inside his tomb. One of the inscriptions reads something along these lines: Unas grows in power by eating other gods. He has acquired the hearts of the gods. Their magic is now in his belly. This could be a metaphor for something else, but it almost sounds as if King Unas ate his enemies, swallowed their hearts, and all was part of some insane attempt to gain their power. Number 9. Pharaoh Pepi II. Pepi II was the last ruler of the 6th dynasty and the final pharaoh of Egypt's Old Kingdom. With the death of Pepi II, Egypt's true grandeur died, and they were plunged into a terrible dark age, one of many that would come in the following centuries. Pepi II went by the royal name Neferkare, meaning beautiful is the soul of Re. He had multiple wives, many children, and appears to have been a decent ruler, all things considered. He had positive foreign relations with Byblos in Syria and Palestine, discussed peace with Nubia, and even made new links with kingdoms in southern Africa. It was his policy to have peace through pacification, as he believed the ruling class of Egypt could only maintain their wealth if they were friendly with all of their neighbors. He ruled from roughly 2278 to 2184 BC. Egyptologists debate these numbers, with some saying he ruled for 64 years, and some saying 94 years. Whatever the case, Pepi II's power began to diminish in his later years. By this time in Egyptian history, the economy was booming. They had their own breed of capitalism, which was funneling the money from the people into a very small group of rich individuals who owned pretty much everything. This became an issue for the pharaoh. The high officials in Egypt were becoming wildly rich. Control was moving away from the capital at Memphis, and individuals were wielding their own influence. To put it in modern perspective, it would be as if the CEOs of the biggest tech companies suddenly built their own cities and had their own miniature governments to take power away from the capital. And that's what happened here, with the nobles in cities like Akhmin, Abydos, and Elephantine building their own palaces and pyramids and tombs. They had so much influence that Pharaoh Pepi II lost his grip on the country, and within a few years, the entire government completely unraveled. Number 8. The First Intermediate Period. After the death of Pepi II, the Egyptian government was in shambles. This started the actual Dark Age of ancient Egypt, and it was not pretty. This age is officially known as the First Intermediate Period of Egypt, and it lasted from 2181 until 2040 BC. After the turmoil of the Dark Ages, the Middle Kingdom would start, but never again to this very day has Egypt ever reached the brilliance of the Old Kingdom prior to the Dark Age. So Egypt is plunged into chaos. The power, which had been held by the monarchy in Memphis for roughly 500 years, was distributed to lower status people throughout the country. Some of the lucky ones were the mortuary priests, who had been heavily involved in the construction of the pyramids at Giza in the 4th dynasty. So many resources had been put into building the pyramids that the priests who took care of the site grew their own kind of cult, almost like the Roman Catholic Church. You could think of the Egyptian mortuary priests like the original bishops at the Vatican. Basically, the pharaoh was no longer in control. The death priests were running wild with power and accumulating wealth, and individual governors were trying to run their own cities like countries. For over a century, there was lawlessness and any harmony was shattered. People no longer felt they were united as one Egypt, but were reduced once more to tribes of bickering states. Number 7. Deadly Famine. In the year 2180 BC, at the beginning of the original Dark Ages in Egypt, Egypt, famine swept across the country. It was already chaotic because of the collapse of the power structure, and famine only made things a lot worse. Egypt depended on the annual floods of the Nile to irrigate their crops. If there was any change at all in the climate, they were in some serious trouble, and it was right at the start of the Dark Ages that the African monsoons were pushed south out of Ethiopia, meaning the Nile didn't flood, and the crops didn't get the water they desperately needed. Because there was no rainwater coming down from the Ethiopian highlands to seep into the Nile, there was drought for many years. It's not clear exactly how long the drought lasted, but long enough that historians call it the Great Hunger. People were starving in the streets. There would have been mass casualties, and all the while the ruling parties were hoarding the wealth so that they could survive while the cities were plunged into hungry anarchy. And now for number 6. But first, I want to give a quick shout out to Jessica, Tyree, and Turtlefinks. Thanks so much for watching and supporting this channel. If you are new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already to join the Origins Explained family. Number 6. The Immigrant Uprising. Following the first Dark Ages, Egypt moved into the Middle Kingdom. The pharaohs once more gained a strong grip on the country. The crops were getting watered again, and everything was going smoothly once more as the Egyptians pushed forward into the future. But alas, trouble came once again around the year 1800 BC. Things had been going relatively smoothly for just over 200 years, and then there was some trouble with the ruling pharaohs. One pharaoh after the next proved to be ineffective and weak, and this began a period of turmoil once again. Just before Egypt was plunged into a second Dark Age, a group called the Hyksos used the weakness of the pharaohs to seize control of the northern part of the country. This gave the pharaohs only a small piece of Egypt in the south to rule over. But for a long time, historians didn't know who exactly the Hyksos were or where they came from. They had slightly different names than typical Egyptians, and there are theories that they came from somewhere in Southwest Asia. According to Egyptian texts, they were foreign invaders who took the country by force. But some historians say that was all just Egyptian propaganda. According to archaeologist Chris Stantis from Bournemouth University, the Hyksos were immigrants who had been welcomed into Egypt for several centuries and eventually rose to power. In other words, the Hyksos had been migrating into Egypt from an unknown foreign land ever since the Middle Kingdom started. So many of them came that they were able to seize control of the local government and ultimately overthrow the pharaohs. Number 5. The Second Intermediate Period. Starting in the year 1782 BC, shortly after the Hyksos uprising, Egypt did a faceplant into its second Dark Age. It lasted much longer than the first, all the way until 1570 BC. This dark spell is called the Second Intermediate Period, and it was a bit different from the first Dark Age. This time, the Hyksos held power in the north, while the Egyptians held power in the center, at the capital of Thebes. Then, to the south, the Nubians ruled. What happened was that the pharaohs got weak, the immigrants seized power in the north, and the Nubians took their chance to seize power in the south. This left the pharaohs squished in the middle. It was a time of major disunity, with the Egyptian people fragmented and angry, with cultural divisions and anarchic violence. It was also during the Second Dark Age that the Egyptians lost a lot of their culture, such as the ability to write hieroglyphic scripts. Art quality suffered, literature suffered, Egyptian religion began to decay, and Egypt drifted further and further from their root heritage. It was also a time of great bloodshed, as each individual faction fought for control. It would take 200 years for the Hyksos to be defeated, and for Egypt to once more be unified. It was Ahmose of Thebes who achieved the reunification of Egypt, ushering in what we know of as the New Kingdom. Number 4. The Third Intermediate Period. If Egypt was a TV show, the New Kingdom would be the last season. The New Kingdom lasted from between 1570 to 1069 BC, and there was a very brief time known as the Late Period that came after, from 525 to 332 BC. The Late Period was the epilogue of Egyptian history, when Egypt as a force came to an abrupt halt and Rome took over. But between the New Kingdom and the Late Period, there was the Third Intermediate Period. This was the darkest of all the Dark Ages, lasting for over 500 years, as Egypt corroded in a way it never had before. war. It basically rotted from the inside out. It all started with a division of power. Tanis was the seat of one government, while Thebes was the seat of a powerful theocracy. The high priests ruled Thebes, although they claimed to be ruled over by the god Amun himself. What started as a fracture turned into a total collapse. By the 22nd dynasty, Egypt was fraught with civil war. There were monarchs in just about every major city, including Heracleopolis, Tanis, Thebes, Memphis, Sais, and Hermopolis. Imagine if all the 50 states in the US suddenly went to war with their neighboring states. That was how violent, bloody, and utterly miserable the Third Intermediate Period was. And so, when the Nubians attacked in the 23rd dynasty, Egypt was too weak to fight back because they were already fighting each other. Then the Assyrians invaded, and Egypt was torn. The biggest difference between the Third Dark Age and the other two is that after it came to an end, ancient Egypt as we know it was dead. Number 3. The First Major Conquest. Following the final Dark Age, Egypt was in a strange spot. There were still pharaohs, the Nubians had been defeated, but Egypt just wasn't that powerful. It was around the year 525 BC that Pharaoh Amasis II ruled over the country, while Cyrus the Great was ruling over Persia. Cyrus asked the Egyptian pharaoh for his daughter's hand in marriage, and the pharaoh said no. Amasis was worried that the Persian king was going to use his daughter as a concubine, and it was enough to push the nations into war. In the spring of 525 BC, Egypt was defeated by the Persians at the Battle of Pelusium. That was the defining moment in Egyptian history, as it was the very first time they were actually conquered by an invading force from outside. Cyrus the Great proclaimed himself Pharaoh of Egypt, and Egypt became nothing more than a province of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. And from there on out, Egypt continued to be conquered over and over again, later by Alexander the Great, and finally by Rome. Number 2. The Last Pharaoh of Egypt. Queen Cleopatra was the very last pharaoh of Egypt. Even when Egypt was a vassal state of Persia, there were still pharaohs to hold power for the people. But after Cleopatra, the days of the pharaohs were over forever. Cleopatra was actually Cleopatra VII, and she ruled from between 51 and 30 BC. She was a diplomat, an extraordinarily skilled naval commander, and a linguistic master. She could speak Ethiopian, Hebrew, Arabic, and many more. At the time that she became pharaoh, Egypt had already been ruled over by the Romans for 50 years. She did her absolute best to try and tear away from Roman tyranny, attempting to make Egypt into an independent state. Cleopatra allied herself with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony and bore 4 of his children, but Rome would not leave them alone. Augustus Caesar, also known as Octavian or Gaius Octavius, invaded Egypt in 30 BC with the full force of Rome behind him. By the end of that year, Mark Antony and Cleopatra were dead. Egypt was just another Roman province, and that was the end of 5,000 years of ancient history. Number 1. Egypt in the Middle Ages. The Dark Ages in Europe were between 476 and 800 AD. It was considered a time of technological and cultural stagnation, with Rome collapsed and Europe plunged into darkness and anarchy. But what was going on with Egypt in the European Dark Ages? In the early 500s, paganism was outlawed by the Byzantine Emperor Justinian I. This marked the final closing of many temples in Egypt that had been used for thousands of years. Christians officially established the Coptic Church in Egypt in 538. Many Roman temples dedicated to gods like Horus and Osiris were either destroyed or converted into Christian churches. In the 600s, the Persians took control of Egypt from the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius. Shortly after that, between 639 and 642, Arab armies entered Egypt under the banner of Islam and captured the country. They created a small garrison town which would grow into the capital of Cairo. And so, this was about the time that modern Egypt was born. Over the next 300 years, Islam washed over Egypt, and the old ways of the gods were abolished. Cairo became the capital, and by the year 1000, just after the Dark Ages had ended in Europe, Egypt was one of the most important centers of the medieval world. Cairo would grow into a city of over 24 million people. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time for more videos about amazing history. Bye!